Right now, you're living inside a system that's already failing. You just haven't felt the full impact yet. And the dangerous part is, most people still don't see it. Because by the time it becomes obvious, it's already too late to do anything about it, because systems like this don't collapse the way people expect. They don't send warnings. They don't make announcements. They don't tell you when it's time to prepare. They hold. They stretch. They look stable, right up until the moment they don't. And when that moment comes, it doesn't feel like a crash. It feels confusing. And that confusion is the signal. A house you could afford 2 years ago now feels out of reach. The same groceries you used to buy every week cost noticeably more. The same paycheck, but a completely different life. And nothing around you clearly explains why. Because on the surface, everything still looks normal. People still go to work. Markets still move. The system still appears to function. But underneath, everything has already started to shift. And by the time you realize what's happening, you're not early anymore, you're inside it. Because collapse doesn't begin where people are looking. It begins underneath the system itself. And that system is built on something most people never think about. Not productivity, not value, not even money. It's built on debt. Everything around you, governments, banks, corporations, is operating on borrowed time. Literally, governments borrow to fund spending. Banks create money by issuing loans. Corporations borrow to grow faster. And over time, that becomes the foundation of everything. But here's where it becomes real. You don't see the system. You feel it. You feel it when your money doesn't go as far as it used to. You feel it when your expenses rise faster than your income. You feel it when everything gets more expensive, but nothing actually improves. At first, it's small, easy to ignore, but then it builds, and slowly, you start realizing something isn't right. Because as long as debt keeps expanding, the system looks stable. It grows, it moves. It creates the illusion of progress. But underneath, it's becoming more fragile. Because debt doesn't solve problems, it delays them, it pushes them forward. And every time the system reaches a limit, instead of resetting, it adds more pressure. Lower interest rates, more liquidity, more borrowing. And for a while, it works. Markets rise, assets inflate, people feel wealthier. But what's really happening is dependency. The system becomes more dependent on expansion, more dependent on borrowing, more dependent on something that cannot continue forever. And eventually, that dependency turns into weakness, because there comes a point where there is simply too much debt. And this is where things begin to change, not suddenly, but in ways most people completely miss. Interest rates begin to rise, and suddenly everything becomes more expensive. Not just loans, everything connected to them. Housing becomes harder to afford. Businesses struggle to operate. Consumers feel pressure they can't explain, but they feel it. And this is where most people get trapped, because they think it's temporary. They think things will go back to normal. They've been trained to believe that every crisis gets fixed, that every downturn is solved, that everything eventually recovers. But what if the system itself is the problem? Because this system isn't built to slow down. It's built to expand constantly. And when that expansion slows, everything starts to break. And this is where most people are already too late without realizing it. And the most dangerous part, there's no version of this where things go back to the way they were. Because money doesn't just exist. It needs to move. It needs flow. And when pressure builds, that flow begins to slow down. Banks become cautious. Lending tightens. Liquidity begins to disappear. And when liquidity disappears, the system starts to stall. And when it stalls, it starts feeding on itself. Businesses cut costs. Layoffs begin quietly, then spread. Consumers pull back. Spending drops. Revenue drops. And now the pressure compounds. Because everything in this system is connected. And once one part slows, everything else follows. But here's where it becomes even more dangerous, because when systems like this begin to weaken, the response is always the same. More intervention, more money creation, more attempts to hold everything together. And at first, it works. Markets bounce, confidence returns, people relax. And this is where the illusion becomes strongest, because it feels like the problem is gone. But in reality, the problem has just been pushed further, because now the system depends even more on artificial support. And over time, that support becomes less effective, because people begin to notice something. Prices keep rising, but their purchasing power doesn't. Assets become more volatile, but less predictable. And the gap between what people are told and what they actually experience gets wider. And this is where something breaks. Confidence. Not all at once, but slowly, and then all at once. Because money isn't just currency, it's belief. It only works because people trust it. They trust it will hold value. They trust the system behind it. They trust that tomorrow will function like today. But when that trust begins to crack, everything changes. Because once confidence is gone, there is no system. There is only reaction. Prices accelerate, Markets become unstable, behavior shifts rapidly, people stop thinking long term, and start reacting short term. And this is where history becomes impossible to ignore, because this exact pattern has happened before, over and over again, different countries, different currencies, different time periods, but always the same structure. Debt expands, the system stretches, pressure builds, confidence breaks, and then reset. Sometimes it looks like inflation, sometimes it looks like collapse, sometimes it looks like a crisis nobody expected. But the result is always the same: a transfer, a shift, a reordering of who holds value and who loses it. And the people who get hit the hardest are always the ones who thought nothing would change, the ones who trusted stability, the ones who believed the system would protect them. Because by the time they understand what's happening, they're already positioned wrong. Their money is losing value, their income can't keep up, their options become limited. But the people who understand the pattern move differently. They don't wait for headlines. They don't wait for confirmation. They don't rely on what they're told. They watch the system itself. They watch the pressure building. They watch behavior shifting. They watch the signals most people ignore, and they act before the break. Because when the system finally breaks, it doesn't send a warning. There's no announcement, no clear signal. It happens. And then everything adjusts around it. And right now, we are closer to that moment than most people realize. The signs are already there. The pressure is already building. And the same conditions that have preceded every major financial shift in history are starting to appear again. The only difference is that this time, it's global. And that makes the consequences much bigger. Because when a system this large begins to break, it doesn't just affect markets. It affects everything. Jobs, prices, opportunities, entire ways of living. And the people who understand that early have a chance to adapt. But the ones who ignore it will feel it when it's already happening. And by then, it's not about preparing anymore, it's about reacting. And reacting is always more expensive. Most people won't realize what's happening until it's already changed their life. Not suddenly, but slowly. And then all at once, and by the time they understand it, they won't be trying to get ahead anymore. They'll be trying to catch up. If you want to understand what happens next, and where money actually moves before everything shifts, subscribe, because in the next video, we're breaking down how the wealthy position themselves before a collapse, and why most people are always one step behind.